I wanted to play you something because someone in the Cult of Cornette Facebook group, Victor Rivera, not that one, not the famous America's champion.
All right.
Victor Rivera. But Victor Rivera, the Cult of Cornette member, posted this, and it's pretty interesting, and a lot of the listeners have commented. I wanted to get your thoughts. It's an interview from July of 2019. We played some of his interviews before. This Chris Van Vliet guy.
Ah, the Dutchman up there. He's the Van Vliet?
I don't know if he's a Dutchman.
I bet he might be friends with Ploon and Falco.
Well, maybe so.
Over there in the Netherlands.
Well, speaking of friends, he was
Where were they from? Apeldoorn?
I believe so. And speaking of friends, he was sitting here talking to two of the leaders of all friends, Matt and Nick Jackson. Now, I want to remind you, this is July 2019, so this is months before Dynamite even debuted. But after the announcement that AEW was going to exist. Before Tony Khan was the face of the company, when it was still the Bucks, Omega, and Cody.
We remember those halcyon days before we had to look at Tony Khan on a regular basis. But yes, the announcements had been made. The flurry of speculation was going around, but they hadn't actually debuted on television yet.
So let's see how this holds up. Again, this is an interview with Chris Van Vliet, July 2019, before Dynamite even started, with the Young Bucks.
Well, what size venues can you start running, though, when you start touring?
It depends. Like the UK, I feel like we could probably do a pretty good sized one, wouldn't you think? And probably Toronto as well.
The rule of thumb I always go off of is if it's a big city, it's a big building. Small city, smaller building.
Yeah.
Oh, good
I think
Lord.
we're going to look at 5.
Let me stop right there.
Oh, good
What
Lord.
a brilliant philosophy for someone who never booked shows ever. Big city, big building. Little city, little building. If it's a medium city, I don't know what we'll do.
Well, we gotta find a medium building. My God. Okay, and just once again, I can give you chapter and verse on examples of promotions in days past in the territories that have opened different markets, and some was feast and some was famine, and it didn't have anything to do with the size of the city. It had to do with the size of the crowd of people that were interested in that city. And a lot of times you will find that when you start a promotion, you will do better in the smaller markets first because they have not seen so much live wrestling. They have not been burnt out by the bigger shows with the bigger stars and the bigger budgets. And you can get in there and pop a house. In the first 1 year of active Smoky Mountain Wrestling shows, our biggest crowd was not in Knoxville, Tennessee. It was in Pikeville, Kentucky, 2,000 people. Figure that out. So anyway.
Let's go back to the arena bookers, Matt and Nick Jackson.
5 to 12,000 seaters.
Yeah, that sounds fair. I mean, that's what's on the schedule right now. So
Yeah.
I think we'll plan accordingly too. We don't want to get too far ahead, and then something happens like what happened with New Japan in Dallas. You know what I mean? I'm not to take a shot at them. They shot high, but they couldn't fill it up. Like I just don't want pictures on the internet of empty seats. That's our biggest thing. Like we want to plan ahead and be smart about this.
But is it?
Let me stop right there. They don't want pictures of empty seats on the internet.
There has been more pictures of empty chairs in AEW events than there has in the Bergdorf Goodman furniture catalog over the last year and a half. So I think they lost that fucking battle right off the bat.
And these two are two of the primary reasons why there are so many empty seats. These two idiots. Let's go back to this.
So is it better to sell out a 4,000 seat place or to put 6,000 in a 10,000 seat place?
An economics guy, the finance guy will say 6,000.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
It's all about perception.
Yeah.
The internet's so funny. Like,
it's so funny. Yeah.
Like it's hard to even explain. Like, I don't know what is right.
I put these people in charge of any fucking thing.
That's the dim-witted one, Nick Jackson, trying to.
No, you got to narrow it down a little bit more than that. But who put these two blithering simpletons in charge of anything? They had never booked a building. They had never promoted a show. Oh, God, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I don't mean to go off on a tangent.
And it's important to note, they meant more then than they do
now.
Look at how things have worked out. Again, this is 5 years ago. It's an interesting time capsule. Back to this.
I think the bottom line is the dollar, right? So, like, how big was that building? Okay, how much did that building cost? Did it cost more? Did you make the money back with the 6? Like, it's economics. Like, I don't know. Like, me as a professional wrestler, I'll go, I'd rather sell it at 4,000 so it looks awesome. We rock that building.
The perception of it is you sold it out. No matter how many people you put in the building, it was called a sellout. So it's always going to look better.
Well, then if you run small buildings forever, you'll always sell out.
Exactly.
But at the same time, we're ambitious. Yeah. And I can't see Tony being like, yeah, let's just run theaters forever. Like, he's like us, and Cody and Kenny, they're the same. Like, we're going to shoot high, and we'll probably do, some massive buildings also.
But you're going to get to some cities where there's going to be a real arbitrage between like, all right, it's either this building, it's 2,000, or this building where the NBA team plays.
Yes.
You know?
We're going to have to make a decision
It's going to be tough.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you there's going to be cities where we don't do as good as we usually do in Chicago. And that's just the nature of the business.
Well, there it is.
Let me also mention, he said the financial guys, clearly they are not, would say, well, it's better to have the 6,000 people in the 10,000 seat building, but as wrestlers, we'd rather sell out the 4,000 seat building. And I've said many times, you'd rather sell out a small building than have a little bit bigger crowd in a bigger building, much bigger building, but not just because of the atmosphere, because these dipshits don't understand that the 10,000 seat building costs maybe 2.5 or 3 times what the 4,000 seat building costs. So the financial guys might very well tell you upon further examination that if you put 6,000 people in a 10,000 seat building, it's still going to be more expensive than you just put the 4,000 people in a 4,000 seat building, because the extra 2,000 people may not have paid for the goddamn upgrade in rent from the major arena to the struggling secondary building in town. All these things come into play. And then, again, it's the difference in the interest level in a town. Some towns, even in thriving territories, when we've been going through the Mid-South wrestling dates, I mentioned that even in a record year for business, Biloxi, Mississippi, and Beaumont, Texas can still kiss my big fat white ass. They just and Biloxi had a goddamn 18,000 seat building because it's right there on the coast where all the tourists went. The only place in Mississippi where tourists would go at that point, and probably still. There's no set formula. These guys are just, they've sat in the car and dreamed this without anybody that's actually done it explaining it to them. Sort of like Tony's booking. And I'll make one more statement, is that, again, their level of trepidation for it's going to be a struggle, but we're going to buckle down, put our nose in. No, it's a foregone conclusion. We're going to do this and that and the other thing. And it's the same tone that Tony had when I spoke to him, which I spoke to him before this interview was conducted. And I've mentioned that there was no question in his mind that this was going to take over the world and Vince better be fucking ducking for cover. And it was ludicrous. You can't go into war with a general who is convinced that you're going to mow everybody down and fucking not suffer a casualty. Because that's ridiculous.
Again, serious people knew what to think of Tony and his plans, and that's when Tony was more serious. Look at Tony now, 5 years on after AEW began. Looks like he's been through hell and back. And that was just Wednesday.
Yes. And then he was scared for his life before that.
But this shows you a little bit of the arrogance in the early days. You know, even Cody and all the success he's had, he wasn't an executive. And they all thought they were just going to be executives. It was just like that. Hey, Triple H is an EVP, so now we could all be EVPs.
Well, but now in his defense, Cody is the one who took it seriously and was an EVP and was trying to find talent, was trying to fucking get involved in the television production, was trying to do the other things, creative. And we've heard from Kenny that said, I'm the worst EVP. I don't want to do this. And the other two here... No, that's what he said.
I know. We played the audio. He said that he's an awful EVP.
Yeah, and he didn't want to be. It's not his wheelhouse, as they say. And these other two have been sitting around telling themselves, oh, we can do this and that and the other thing. We'll be the big stars and we'll change the world. And the only thing they're doing is hurting the Big Bang Theory's ratings.
It's them and Tony. They can't sit in a room and look at each other and say, you're the problem. Instead, they're all going to find the solution and fix this thing. The Young Bucks aren't over. They're never going to be over. They can't do this. They've proven
they
it.
will never be over.
Tony can't book. It's been exposed time and time again. And look at where we are 5 years on. I just saw an article that went up today in advance of the ratings with all the ratings for the last year. The main rating and the key demo, everything's down. Everything's down, and they're still pretending like they have any idea what they were doing. They rode a wave of good grace because people wanted an upstart to do good, and people wanted Vince McMahon to fail. The upstart lost its momentum. It's not all because Vince McMahon's gone and Triple H is in charge. It's because of the people running the ship, or captaining the ship, I guess I should say.
Well, and they've gone through several pieces of major talent that at the start were at least in charge of their business or the business that surrounded them, the creative, that they could, and that has been lost as well. And now it's all Tony and it's all this indie-minded stuff. And you mentioned just a minute ago, they had momentum because people wanted them to succeed from the start. This was a gift that they were given that I mentioned before, that almost no other, I'm trying to think of a wrestling promotion, either in the territory days or here in the modern times, that is started as hot as it was going to get, and then is usually when you start something, it has to get an audience, it has to find the fans, and they have to find it, and a blah, 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 and you build. And again, we can quote chapter and verse of markets in the territories that were started, and they never started hot and cooled off. They went the other way. They started because it was brand new. When Jerry Jarrett opened Louisville for the first 6 weeks, he thought he was going to have to close Louisville because it wasn't making any money. But then suddenly the people came, and then it popped. And it was the same thing with Lexington, that I personally witnessed the town open. And it grew and then plateaued, and then it would ebb and fall based on the business. But nothing ever starts, with this much goodwill and this much interest, this much publicity, and these big of a crowds, and then goes steadily. I've never seen that before. But that's because so many people wanted this thing to be good that they assumed it was good at the start, and they were watching it, and it took a while to settle in that these people aren't really on command of what they're fucking doing. And then the attrition comes. That's very unusual.
And they couldn't, and not that everyone can, but specifically when you're completely off base as often as Tony is. And especially like the Young Bucks, who, for people who don't think it's ego and money driven for them, that's all it is. That's all it's ever been.
Yeah.
But they can't look at themselves and evaluate themselves and see the problems. Instead, everything else has been the problem. Jim Cornette was the problem. CM Punk was the problem. Cody was the problem. Although now everyone's like, oh, that wasn't it. Yeah, it was. Cody was the problem. Everyone was a problem or is a problem. They took their fans for granted, and they thought that their creative vision would somehow keep interest that was going to grow and be excited, and it's gone. There's no excitement in these shows. This is a hell of a lead up to the Dynamite review. There's no excitement in their shows. Nobody's over. Their baby faces are all dead.
But and I'm telling you again, we said this 5 years ago. The biggest reason at the root of this, not just Tony's booking, but the fact that Tony and the people he surrounds himself with, that he listens to the most, cannot pick talent. They think their friends are the greatest things in the world. They think that regardless of what everybody else in the world would look at and see, no, this guy's great. And the talent has been specious from the beginning, because for every Bryan Danielson, you also got a fucking Orange Cassidy. that's been shoved down everybody's throat when it wasn't funny to begin with. And here's that's from the start. I got a guy that's a fucking joke. I'm going to push him. Why would you do that to begin with? But then I got a guy that's a joke that does the same thing he did 5 years ago, and I've put him on almost every one of my televisions and I dressed up like him at Halloween a couple of years ago, and I don't understand why my business is tanking. They have no eye for talent. They have eye for their friends.
Well, again, that was a 2019 Young Bucks interview. You can go through the archive of the Experience in a Drive-Thru, hear how we've been covering this stuff in real time for the last 5 years.